At the beginning of this semester of my dental school experience, I began using a new study app called Remnote. The app had been recommended to me multiple times, so I figured I would give it a try and talk about it on this channel since I am a self-proclaimed Anki fanboy. I've been using Anki in dental school now for almost 2 years, and I'd heard good things about Remnote, so I wanted to give it a try. In this video, I'm going to be comparing the classic, the very, very popular, the very discussed and published app Anki versus a new note-taking and flashcard app called Remnote. In the video, you will hear pros and cons for both Anki and Remnote, and you'll also hear just sort of my general thoughts on both of these apps, how I like to use them to study, and then which app I will be using moving forward as I continue on in dental school. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments. Also, leave a like on the video and subscribe to this channel if you want to see more content about Anki, Remnote, or whatever it is that you enjoy about my channel. Make sure you subscribe. So first, just some general thoughts on both of these apps. I've said this a lot in the past, but I don't take notes. I'm not a note taker. I feel that when I sit down in a lecture and take notes, I end up with notes that I can go through and look at, but ultimately reading through text just doesn't do it for me. I don't learn material very well. So at a point early on in my dental school career, I decided to take the advice of people like Ali Abdaal, and I dove into spaced repetition and active recall, and I specifically loved the active recall system and just how much it caused my brain to actually pull information out instead of just mindlessly shoving things in. So I dove into Anki and I began learning the app and just using it each and every day. And that's kind of how my first year and a half of dental school went. But in operating this YouTube channel and making a few videos about my experiences with Anki, I heard a few people say, why don't you try out Remnote? And finally, at the beginning of this semester, it was a good time to try out a new app. I was completely fresh with a bunch of new classes and it was just the perfect time. So I tried that one out. And once again, ultimately, I don't take notes. I really like to just make flashcards and then study them. Repetition, repetition, repetition. It's kind of hard to say. I like to go through flashcards and just learn material by asking myself good questions. It does also help me to sit down and create flashcards from a lecture, because instead of just reading material and maybe taking some notes on it, I can actually go through material and pick out good test-like questions to make flashcards out of that I then will be able to go back and learn. And to preface this before I get into both of these apps, generally speaking, satisfy what I personally need from a study tool. They allow you to make flashcards and then study them. They both have interval systems that allow you to rank how you're doing on each and every flashcard so that basically they can stack them in a certain way that allows you to see the ones that you need to see first more, and then the ones that you're doing really well on, you can see less. Both of these systems do that quite well, and so that really satisfies what I need. So pros and cons for Anki. Anki is a great and very, very powerful tool. Once again, it's something that I've really enjoyed for a long time. And the first pro that I can think of is a simplified UI. Now you'll hear me use the term UI quite frequently in this video. That just stands for user interface. And it's essentially the way that the whole app and program looks when you're using it. With Anki, it's a very simple app. The text is simple. There's not a whole lot of logos around or pictures of anything. It's just pretty bare bones and simplistic. And it kind of reminds me of like GitHub in a way, which is a website where people share their coding. I don't know a whole lot about that world. It's just a simple system. It looks very basic and very simple. And that can be a really good thing when you're studying. Having a simple UI is actually probably a positive thing. Just bare bones, a question, and then the answer when it pops up when you want it to. That's kind of a good thing. The second pro for Anki is massive configurability. You can do a ton with the Anki app, and it all comes through add-ons. I've talked about specific add-ons and sort of the ones that I use in Anki in past videos, but basically add-ons are tools that you can add to your Anki to do more than what the base version that you can download will do. And I'm talking there are tons and tons of add-ons to Anki. Some of them are entirely unnecessary. They're basically creature comforts, things that you don't actually need but you might enjoy adding on. And some are pretty essential, as I've talked about in the past. But the major point of this Pro is that there's just so much that you can do with Anki, and the more and more you learn it and get into it, you'll find what you need from it as a study tool, and you'll find that there are people on the internet who have made add-ons to satisfy those needs. I think that's honestly the biggest pro of Anki, is just how much you can do with it. You can customize it to fit you personally, what works for you. And the last pro that I wanted to talk about is similar to the last point, and that is the community of people who use Anki and post about it online. There are multiple places. The ones that I can think of are Reddit and then GitHub. And these are places where there's a great thriving Anki community of people like yourself who are out there trying to study and trying to use Anki most effectively. And they have tons of add-ons that they've created and decks as well. Really, really a positive thing. This has specifically helped me in the past, mostly with gross anatomy. When I took gross anatomy as a first-year dental student, I actually used multiple decks that I found on the internet just to help me go through more flashcards and learn more. A lot of people will upload their Anki decks to the internet, to places like Reddit, and you can just go through, download the files, add them to your Anki, and begin studying just like that. So a couple of cons to Anki. Firstly, there is a large learning curve with it. Now, one video that I've also been wanting to make is basically a user's guide, day one guide to using Anki, because I remember when I started out, I was super confused. Number one, to what the app was and what it did. It's simply a flashcard app. Number two, I didn't know how to use it. I didn't know how to add cards, how to study them. I didn't understand what the settings meant. There was just a lot to it. So I would say that the learning curve is a negative. If you've never used the app before, you're gonna probably feel like I did and hop on and be a little bit overwhelmed and have no idea what you're doing. Hopefully I can make a video about that in the future, and if you wanna see that, let me know. The next con that I can think of doesn't really apply to me, but it might apply to you, and that is that there's no real note-taking ability in Anki. Anki is purely a flashcard app. There's not really gonna be a way for you to take notes. So for example, if you're sitting in a lecture hall listening to a lecture and you don't wanna sit there and actually try to make good Anki flashcards while your teacher is talking, you're gonna have to use a different app. Maybe you can use something like Notion if you wanna take some notes, but basically Anki does flashcards, by my knowledge, and that's pretty much it. And the final con is that the iOS version of Anki, which is great, and I highly recommend if you're a student who uses it daily or even close to daily, the iOS version of Anki is $25. Really not that big of a deal. It just feels a little bit expensive maybe for an app, but if you use it like I do and you greatly benefit from having the app on your phone and having the option of studying in any and every place in the world, definitely invest in that $25 Anki iOS app. Now let's move on to Remnote. Once again, this is a newer app, I think, or newer program. It's certainly newer to me, and I think there are a lot of things in Remnote that are still being built out. Also, the point needs to be made that I do not know everything there is to know about both Anki and Remnote. These are just my experiences. The first thing that I loved about Remnote when I started using it was the incentive system. I have in my notes that I took about the app that it's a fire incentive system. This is essentially the system that rewards you for studying your cards daily. It's kind of like a Snapchat streak. If you are someone who's had Snapchat for a while, you might know that in Snapchat, if you Snapchat somebody each and every day, it establishes a streak. Some people are super obsessed with it. I've seen people with 1,300 days worth of Snapchat streaks. But basically, there is a system in Remnote that's built in where if you hit a certain number of daily flashcards that you study, it'll add it to your streak. And really that's nothing but just incentivizing you a little bit to study, which is a great thing. But I just like that this is built into Remnote. It's right there, and when you start studying your flashcards daily, you'll see it pop up. Now, it's worth noting here that Anki does have a version of this in the form of an add-on, and it's called the heat map. But the Anki heat map, in order to satisfy one day of studying, you just need to study one card. So there are many times when I will actually go in and just mindlessly study one card so that my little square is filled for that day in my heat map. But with Remnote, you have to actually go through and study a good bit of cards. I think for me, it was like 50 to 70 cards each day, but I think the more cards you study, the more cards you have to study in order to hit your daily goal. It's a really good incentive system and I like it a lot. Another thing is there's a very simple way to turn on the dog pictures or GIFs that come up when you finish a day of studying. Once again, Anki has an add-on for this, but I am a huge dog lover, and the fact that Remnote made it really easy in their settings to turn on this dog GIF incentive system, I enjoyed that. Now, the next pro that I wanted to talk about with Remnote is pretty simple, and that is the UI. I talked a lot about the Remnote UI in my first impressions of Remnote video. If you haven't seen that, check that out right here. But the UI of this app and the app in general, it's built out extremely well. It's very visually pleasing, much more visually pleasing than Anki. I praised Anki a little bit for having a simple UI. I think Remnote just has an overall better UI. It looks nicer, it's more visually pleasing, and there are certain aspects of it that I think are a little bit more clear. Now, the final thing that I want to praise about Remnote is the ability to search through topics that you've made notes on or made flashcards on, and to filter those into a studyable deck. Now, when it comes to like studying specific topics in Anki, you can do it, and there are many ways to do it, but it's a little bit more confusing. And to be honest with you, I think even to this day, after using it for almost 2 years, I don't think I have a great grasp of how to study a specific set of topics or one specific lecture or one specific course over a period of time. Hopefully this is making some sense to you, but basically because of the structure of Remnote, which is basically a note-taking app wherein you can make flashcards from your notes, because of that structure, it's really easy and simple to create, I would call them filtered decks because that's what they're called in Anki, but decks of flashcards from very specific parameters that you can select. If I want to study one specific lecture in my pain control class from last Tuesday, I can actually go into Remnote, type in the name of that lecture, and I can study all the cards from just that lecture. This means that I don't have to spend time on the top end like I do in Anki, making specific decks and hierarchies of decks to try to make sure everything is organized. In Remnote, I can make class folders, I can then make lecture documents, I can make flashcards in all of those lecture documents, and then after the fact, when I go to study, I can either study all of the cards that I've made, I can study all of the cards from this semester, I can study all of the cards from this test period, or all of the cards from one specific lecture. You get the point. It's just way easier to study specific sets of cards instead of trying to have to do it all on the top end. And if you haven't used either of these apps, that might be kind of hard to understand, but once you use Remnote, you'll see what I mean. When you go through start studying, you can hit that little search bar and search up exactly what you want to study, and it's super, super nice. Now, a couple of cons for the Remnote app. Number one, Remnote to me has been a bit glitchy. There have been a couple times when the app has frozen and I've had to actually just exit out of the whole thing and start fresh. There are a couple times when I will be typing out notes or cards and I'll indent and I'm unable to actually keep my cursor where it is and it pops back up to the top or something. There are just things that have been a bit glitchy. Additionally, I also added a bunch of pictures to a lecture or a few lectures, and then without any explanation, they were just gone a few days later. That's kind of another just general glitch. And actually the only other negative about Remnote that I have listed down in my impressions notes is that there was some trouble syncing between the Remnote on my iPad that I was using there and the Remnote on my MacBook. And this, I think, is probably another glitch. In other words, if one day I was studying cards on my iPad and I actually hit my daily goal, I would then go to my laptop, whether it was an hour later, 2 hours later, plenty of time for it to have synced, and it would have said that I didn't actually hit my daily goal that day. The two weren't really communicating that well, and I think that that's an issue that will probably be resolved pretty quickly by the folks over at Remnote. I think they're still just working on making sure the app works seamlessly between devices, and so that's not something that I'm gonna take off too much. It was just a bit annoying. And that also goes for the random glitches that I was talking about. I would encourage you to go in and use it, see if you experience some of these glitches, and like I did, and if you don't, that means that things have been fixed. And if you do, well, they're not too bad. You can live with them. Now, this video has gotten exceedingly long, so what are my final thoughts? Here's the deal. I'm gonna continue to use Anki as my app of choice here, and there's actually a pretty simple reason for that, and I maybe should have listed this as a con, but I got to the point where Remnote was actually asking me to pay for specific features like image occlusion. Now, I don't use image occlusion a ton anymore in my day-to-day use of these apps, but it's something that is a free add-on for Anki, and Remnote asked me to start paying for it. And I just decided I don't want to pay for an add-on that I have for free over here in Anki, especially since I paid $25 for the Anki iOS app and I've already invested in this stuff. So that was like the reason alone why I decided to stick with Anki. But if you are new to both of these apps and you're using them for the first time, or you're trying to pick one to start using, I think I would actually recommend Remnote. I think the learning curve is gonna be much quicker, much easier. It functions a lot more like a Notion or a Quizlet. It's just built out a little bit more simply. There are things about Anki that I still don't understand and still don't have great explanations for. So I think if you're, once again, a first-time user, Remnote is probably the way to go. And when you do get to that paywall for certain things like image occlusion, you probably can go ahead and invest a little bit to get those features. Once again, I invested in Anki's iOS app, so there is a good argument to be made for investing in these apps. If you are someone who's used Anki for a long time like me, you'll probably want to stick with Anki. I don't think that Remnote is necessarily offering anything groundbreaking that Anki isn't offering, unless you are a note taker. If you're a note taker and you're tired of taking notes in Notion and then trying to match it up with your Anki, you like to do both, I would try out Remnote. Remnote allows you to seamlessly take notes and make flashcards. They're all in there together. They're all integrated very nicely. But since I don't take notes, once again, I will be sticking with Anki. Both of these apps are extremely capable, and I need to make the point yet again that I've made in multiple videos, and that is it's sort of the wizard, not the wand when it comes to these study apps. Learning material, it's not going to be done by downloading an app. The apps make things a little bit easier, but generally speaking, the onus is on you to learn the material that you have to learn for your program. Experiment with these two apps and see what works for you specifically. These are, once again, just my experiences with both of these apps, and I don't think any of you should take this as absolute law. It's just my experience. I would recommend both of these apps to any student who is looking to make better flashcards, looking to study flashcards daily. I think they both work great. And that's pretty much my only thoughts. Hopefully this was a helpful video for you. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything, let me know in the comments. I always make these videos about Anki, Remnote, whatever, and I have so many helpful people in the comments letting me know about the gaps in my own knowledge. So thank you to all of you who've done that in the past. And if you have any help, any comments, tips, things, whatever it is, let me know down below. And this video is super long, so thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna let you all go now. I appreciate you, I love you. As I always say at the end of my videos, I will see you in the next one.